So we've all seen Rebels, right? Darth Maul dies, gets killed by Kenobi. But that's, of course, Rebels, which is post-2014 Disney canon timeline material. And it's not actually part of the Legends or EU or old timeline. It's not part of that continuity. So the question is, when did Darth Maul actually die in that old continuity, in that timeline? Now, there is no actual official story that depicts Darth Maul's death in that timeline, but you might have heard of a game called Battle of the Sith Lords, better known as the Darth Maul game. And you might think, oh well, like, that's just a game that never got released, that doesn't mean anything. But that's where you're wrong, because it actually had heavy Lucas involvement. Before I go into that quickly, I'll explain, why that matters. Now, I am going to do a video separately, going fully in depth into the canon hierarchy, but essentially the canon hierarchy is the system in place for the old timeline, or the Legends timeline, the EU, whatever you want to call it, that sorts certain material into different categories of canonicity to help with continuity and help deal with retcons, etc. At the very bottom you got N-canon, then you got S-canon, then you got C-canon, then you got T-canon, and at the very top you've got G-Canon. And G-Canon is established as the highest level of canon in the old timeline, so anything that's G-Canon takes precedence over anything in the tiers below it. And that is contradictions on a case-by-case basis. And what's so important about G-Canon is that it is literally everything from George, spanning even down to George's thoughts that would technically be G-Canon. So George having heavy involvement with that game, with Battle of the Sith Lords, means that the concepts that, in particular the concepts that came from George, that are in that video game, can be attributed to the EU, to the old timeline. So we can actually get a look at Maul past his last appearance in the story. So to what extent was George actually involved with the Battle of the Sith Lords? So Dan Borth, CEO of Redfly Studios, the company that was going to be developing this Maul game, answered a lot of questions about this. And he actually said that they had some concepts on the go, and when they brought Lucas in for reviewal of everything, which is standard procedure in Lucasfilm, Lucas had to approve everything. And when they brought Lucas in to approve it, he essentially reworked the whole thing and told his own story. So turns out Lucas was a really big fan of Darth Talon. And don't get me wrong, she has got a set of amazing tits, but he went to such extent to essentially extend Maul's lifespan up until the legacy period, to be able to have a buddy cop duo with Maul and Talon. I don't know, seems a bit odd, but Lucas wants this, so it's G-Canon. So we need to look at it. So what's interesting there is that Dan Borth says that these characters are separated by more than 170 years, so they have to close a 170-year gap, which is interesting because Legacy War ends in 138 ABY, which is only like 150, 160 years. So it's possible that this game was going to take place 10 years after the last we see of Legacy. And apparently Redfly Studios wanted to take this game in an entirely different direction with Maul. But apparently Lucas representatives and Lucas himself were dead strict about, nah, you can't do that, you have to do this, this is what we have to do with Maul. And then of course Maul is also alive in Lucas's sequel ideas that he covered in Star Wars Archives. So it seems like a pretty solid Lucas point, pretty solid EU point that Maul didn't die when he did in Rebels, and he's still alive way after Return of the Jedi. Not only is he still alive, but he's this big bad threat. Again, he's risen up to the top. One of the concepts of this game was going to have Maul challenge Darth Krait's established one Sith order, and he was going to try and reinstate the rule of two. And when this massive time difference was brought to Lucas's attention, he essentially brushed it off. He didn't care, and he wanted it anyway, and he said, well, make it a clone or something. So what it ended up being was actually an heir of Darth Maul. It was Darth Maul's heir, guided by the ghost of Darth Maul, which is kind of weird, right? Because Lucas is against Force Ghosts for Sith, so I don't know why he's put that in there. What's interesting there is the fact that the Ghost is guiding this heir of Maul, and the fact that he's the heir of Maul, which makes me think, and this is just a theory, but probably a likely one, judging by what's going on there, is that Maul is actually going to possess this body. And we only get little bits and pieces of information to work with here, but it very much seems like he went with the whole clone idea, similar to what's seen in Dark Empire. Possibly had Maul's spirit inhabit this clone of Maul. And this seems more than likely, given that Darth Maul himself is the character that Lucas is so adamant to have portrayed. And it'd also be a lot more in line with Lucas' beliefs that Maul essentially body hopped instead of remained active as a ghost. Seems to be an idea he likes so much that it even influenced his ideas for the sequels, that he talks about. So technically we've got two stories going on here with Maul. We've got the story from Lucas's sequel trilogy, which would have involved him essentially being like a crime lord, and then we've got the Maul story from the Maul game, based in the Legacy era, which would have had Maul, essentially inhabit a clone and then try and re-establish the rule of 2 and bring down the rule of 1. Initially this game had a different Sith Emperor as well. It wasn't Darth Krayt, but that seems to be a scrap concept, because Dan Borth later says that Darth Maul was to bring down the Sith under Darth Krayt. So there's probably a little dynamic going on there between those two, a little rivalry between Darth Krayt and Darth Maul. And it's half shit that we didn't get to see this. I reckon it would have been sick. And there's not, as I say, there's not much information about it. So that's pretty much all we get. But the conclusion here anyway is that Darth Maul is alive in the Legacy era in the Legends timeline. And he's actually still alive past when the Legends timeline ends. So that's interesting, considering, he was born in like 54 BBY. But I have no doubt that, this would have been Darth Maul's prime. So when we're talking about, when was Darth Maul's prime, technically, Legacy, I'd wager. Especially if he was having a rivalry with Krayt. But yeah, there's not really much we can go off here. But that's pretty much all we got. But if you enjoyed the video anyway, give it a little thumbs up, and I'll see you in a bit.